Fantastic. Briefly in the two languages of this country, and then I will switch to English. Eli tervetuloa kaikille tähän NordicHubin klusterikoulutuksen 3. sessioon. Ni är alla hjärtligt välkomna till NordicHubs tredje klusterutbildningssession. Koska koulutus järjestetään englanniksi, niin tulen myös itse pääsääntöisesti käyttämään englantia, mutta jos teillä on joku kysymys ja esitätte sen mieluummin suomeksi, niin ilman muuta tehkää näin ja käännetään sitten kysymys. Så eftersom utbildningen går på engelska så kommer jag själv också att tala engelska, men om ni har någon fråga som ni hellre ställer på svenska så gör det fritt fram att göra det, så översätter vi vid behov. So now I can switch to English, and as I think there are some persons here who were not able to attend the 2 first sessions, I would like to take this opportunity to just give a brief introduction about who we are. So starting with myself, my name is Lauri Laaksonen, and I work as a marketing and communication specialist, as well as the NordicHub manager at Viexpo. As probably some of you already know, NordicHub is coordinated by Viexpo, and it has 2 main functions. NordicHub is first of all a platform for Finnish cluster activity and its development, and our goal is to highlight and connect Finnish clusters and to increase information exchange so that not only cluster actors but also decision makers and the broader audience's awareness and knowledge about clusters and cluster activity here in Finland increases. Secondly, NordicHub is also a bridge builder, a network that aims to connect Finnish clusters with Nordic clusters and to enhance cooperation. This work is done in tight collaboration with our Nordic partners, and the goal is also to start these kind of joint projects together and introduce new overall solutions utilizing modern and proactive ecosystems thinking. And in accordance with the purpose of NordicHub and led by our great trainers, the renowned cluster experts Christian Rangen and Roberto Chaveri from Engage Innovate, we embarked on an inspiring and unique learning journey here approximately 1 month ago in mid-September. And the themes of the 2 sessions then were why Finland needs to compete on clusters, and then designing winning cluster business models. And today's sessions has the theme cluster leadership, leading for collaboration, and tomorrow we then end with a session about developing Finland's national cluster program. And I also want to present our trainers once again, for those of you who have not met these gentlemen before. Christian is the CEO and co-founder of Engage Innovate, as well as Strategy Tools, and he's also involved in many other organizations, such as teaching at BI, Norwegian Business School. He has worked around the world with companies, clusters, and governments, helping them with strategy and transformation. And in recent years, a lot of focus has been put on exploring, researching, and building innovation superclusters, I think. And with his help, good results have been achieved in the establishment and early stage cluster development, cluster management training, ecosystem development, cluster strategy, national cluster policy development, and innovation supercluster development. And he's also, for instance, inventor of 50 visual strategy tools in use with thousands of companies around the world. And Roberto, who hopefully will join us today, he's a partner at Engage Innovate, and he leads the company's operations in Latin America and the development of strategy tools in the region there. He's an executive with more than 18 years of experience in management positions in the areas of marketing, corporate business development, general management, and consulting. And he has multiple years of experience as a regional lead in multinational companies, like the Clorox company, British American Tobacco, and the Coca-Cola company. So I think it is safe to say that we have some true experts as our trainers during these sessions. And before I give the stage to them, I would like to remind you of a few practicalities. During the session, you can ask questions in the chat, and I also encourage you to network during these sessions. You can, for instance, share your LinkedIn profiles or websites in the chat. And after each session, we will ask for instant quick feedback via the chat. And after tomorrow's session, we will send a feedback questionnaire to all of you. And I want to highlight that your feedback is highly important for us so that we can keep on providing these kind of services and the further development. So please take a few moments to fill it in, because it's very short. And finally, please keep your microphones and cameras off during the event when you're not speaking, so we don't get this kind of interruptions. And as said, the event is recorded. So now please, Christian, and the stage is yours, and Roberto, if Roberto has joined us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lauri. Just to check, you can see and hear me okay?
Yeah, great.
Perfect. Now, for those of you just joining, so I'm currently up in the Norwegian mountains, and we have it's like 3 degrees and raining. So everyone is just kind of waiting for the fall to turn into winter. So that's why I found a nice Finnish winter photo, for some nature inspiration. So thank you, and hello everyone. Now I just want to have a quick check-in. So if you guys could use the chat, so use the Zoom chat, and just reply yes or no if you participated in the previous sessions. We had 2 sessions about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I'd like to have just a yes or no to see sort of how many were present. All right, so we're getting in. So we have first 8. All right, so roughly 60% that participated last time. That's super. We're going to make sure to mix you with some people that were here last time and some people that were not here last time, because we're going to be building on what we covered last time. But you're not going to miss very much if you didn't join last time. So we'll be building on, but we'll have a lot of new content as well. So I'm going to share my screen here, and for those of you that did not join last time, you'll probably learn quite quickly that the way we work here is relatively few slides, relatively little PowerPoint presentation, and then most of the time is spent working in groups, solving specific tasks and challenges. So what we're going to go through today is around cluster leadership and what I call leading for collaboration. And this will be equally valid and equally relevant for those of you that are working with networks or more informal ecosystems. And of course, those of you that are currently leading a cluster, or maybe you aspire to, or you plan to be leading in clusters. So it's going to be very much around leadership. It's going to be around the role of the CEO or the project manager. It's going to be around the role of the board, which is very, very important and largely under served in the cluster space. We're going to focus on the cluster organizational structure, and there's a lot of kind of neat little tricks, if you will, that you can tweak and handle and deal with regards to the cluster organizational structure. And then finally, we're going to be looking at the cluster project portfolio, which is where the real work happens. And towards the end today, you'll sort of see how all of these pieces come together. So that's what we will be covering during this day. And then tomorrow, we have a different topic where we look at the national program. That's tomorrow. So part number 1, CEO and board. Then we're going to have a good break in between. And then we have part 2, which is around the organizational structure and projects. But I want to start with the cluster leadership and what we call leading for collaboration. And the fundamental premise here is that being the CEO or being the chairman of the board or being in charge of a cluster is very different. It's very different from how most business organizations are organized. And we've seen many industry leaders come into a cluster and realizing they really need to rethink and rewire themselves. So this is a good friend of mine, a professor at the BI, Norwegian Business School in Oslo, that Lauri mentioned. His name is Morten, so Professor Morten Berg, and he has been writing about the concept that he calls the 5 levels of leadership. Now, what's interesting is when we talk to cluster managers, and I've personally interviewed probably about 100 cluster managers around this. They all say different varieties of cluster leadership is nothing like regular leadership. This is also a good friend of mine. His name is Arild. He comes from a sales and leadership background at IBM. And he was one of the people that had to really sort of rethink his leadership role when he left IBM to go and start and build this smart care cluster. So according to Morten, the professor, there are 5 kind of original levels of leadership. We're going to show these on the screen right here. So the first is what he called self-leadership, which is about managing yourself and managing your energy and managing your motivation and managing your time. Then we have the operational, which is kind of running the business on a day-to-day basis, leading your team, leading the next couple of teams. Then we have the administrative, which is making sure that your organization has processes set up, making sure that we have the accounting system set up, making sure we have billing and invoicing set up. So a lot of the sort of the back office that just needs to get done. And then we have the strategic leadership, which is which products in which markets and versus which competitors, and how do we finance this company. So it's the medium to long term. And then we have the visionary, which is really, where are we taking this company over the next 20, 25 years? So according to Mr. Berg, all business leadership can be put into these 5 categories. Now, what we found when we started working and really digging into the question around leadership for clusters is that we found 8 levels of leadership. So you'll see that we still have the same. So this is what we call the visionary. So a cluster leader ideally should be able to articulate, where is this industry going? What is the long-term impact? What is the long-term relevance? What is the long-term consequences of how and where this industry is developing? And then we need to be able to articulate to our members and to our stakeholders that if we invest into this industry now, if we invest into this cluster now, we will get the following effects 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Now that's the same as with the business. The next one is different though. And this is what we call the network leadership. Now that means that you need to be able to access networks, tap into networks, be invited into networks, having access to people within those networks. So you can actually do a lot of influencing leadership through networks, not just through a regular sort of organizational hierarchy. And it requires you to have access to people that are maybe far away from the day-to-day operation of the cluster. Next, we have the strategic, which is also similar to the business, but then we have the influential, and this one is probably the most important. This is all about soft power, diplomacy, your ability to get the right people to listen, and then maybe sometimes get the right people to actually pay for your projects and pay for the cluster. So here we look at the cluster leader as having a lot of diplomacy power, a lot of soft power, a lot of relationship power. And you need to be able to, shift significant projects or challenges or initiatives, even though you have a very small operating organization. Then we have the administrative focus, and then we have the member focus. And this is the third one, which is separate, different. Now, this means that you need to be spending the majority of your time, not with your team internally, but going out and really working with your member organizations and your partners in the cluster. So it means understanding typically your top 100, maybe top 200 member organizations. What are the pain points? What are their challenges? What is their strategies? Which markets are they going to go into? Which kind of people are they looking for? So a lot of insights is required to make sure, do I really understand my members? And then finally, we have the operational. Let's switch this back. Finally, we have the operational, which is making sure your team is doing okay, making sure everyone knows their expectations and tasks, etc. And then finally, you have the self-leadership. So having worked with leadership development in many clusters, I think it's extremely important to sort of understand these 8, and particularly understand how leading a cluster is quite different from leading a regular business organization. And I'm sure that many of you on this call also have similar experiences. Now, if we go into a little bit more detail around this, we're not going to be doing this today, but I want to show you, then you can access this later. I will, of course, be sending this out. But this is a cluster leadership map that we've developed, where we identify those 8 levels. And then when we work with leadership development program, we have people do self-assessment. So self-assessment being from the scale of 1 to the scale of 10. And we have the biggest strength and then items to improve. And this basically becomes a self-assessment tool where you could say, I'm like probably something like this as a profile. And then you would say, okay, well, what are the strengths and what do you want to work on? And you can continue to work on your strengths, you can continue to work on your weaknesses. So we've used this with dozens and dozens of cluster leaders in various parts of the world. So kind of recap these key elements, and you guys are going to be discussing this in just a minute. So the first one is visionary leadership. Like, where will this industry be in 25 years? And I meet some cluster managers, and they haven't even given this thought. Like, why should I care about this? This is too far out. It's too difficult. Like, yes, it is. But a big part of what the cluster wants to achieve is going to happen over the next 1 or 2 decades. So you need to be able to think that long term. For the network, and this is really about your access to the key executives and the key people, both on the private side, but also on the public side, for the government side. Then we have the strategic, where you ask, like, how can we shape this industry for the next typically 5 or 10 years? So for a cluster leader, that would be, what could we do to shape the Energy Vasa cluster and really help actively shape the energy transition in Finland? Or if you have a gaming cluster, the question would be like, how could we double the size of this industry for Finland over the next 5 years, for example? So some pretty ambitious questions to be asked. Influentials, this is your ability to yield soft powers and diplomacies. So we want to look at deep personal relationships. Then we have the administrative, which is basically how do we make this cluster run with a minimum of admin resources, because you're never going to have enough people, you're never going to have enough time, you're never going to have enough money to sort of run it as well as you would have liked. Then we have the members, which is all about understanding our members and understanding what their challenges and opportunities. And I've met cluster managers that have this insane level of detailed understanding where they can go up on a whiteboard and they can explain like the top 200 members, challenges, opportunities, gaps, pain points, and they just know them so intimately. While other cluster managers are pretty much blind to this. Then we get into the operation, which is all about your team and the kind of the cluster staff, which can be small, it can be big. Then we get into self-leadership. How do I manage myself? How do I manage my tasks without killing myself in the process? Because I have never met a cluster manager that was not significantly overworked. And then finally, you have what we call the overall leadership, like how well are we performing as a cluster? So let me stop there. We're going to give you guys a task in just a minute, but I want to see, do we have any questions, any comments, any input on this before we proceed?
I can just point out quickly that at some points, Chris, your sound disappears a bit. So okay. I'm not sure. Just so you know. But I think it's been working better now. It was in the beginning more. Okay. But yeah, just so you know. So especially the more important sections, if take a bit slower than if there is some issue. Sure. So it seems that when it goes quicker, then it disappears. But yeah, okay. Probably some internet issues, John. Yeah.
All right, so we're going to switch over, and Larry, if that happens again, just please let me know. So for those of you that joined us last time, you will probably remember the big Mara board that we were working on, and I'm going to give you a very quick recap, and I'm going to show you where we're going to be working today. So the way that we set this up is that we have day number 1 right here. Then we have day number 2. And this is where we did a lot of work around strategy and business models. And then today we're going to be working here where it says day 3, cluster leadership. And in a few minutes, we're going to put you into different groups where you will have a chance to be working together. I'm just going to make sure everyone is able to log in first. All right. So we have about 19 people on the Zoom call. And I now pasted the Miro link in the Zoom chat, so you should be able to access it on your computers. We're seeing the first 10, 11 people log in. This is great. Okay, so let me show you what we're going to be doing today, and then in just a few minutes, we're going to put you guys into your groups for the first of 3 working sessions that we have planned today. So I can see, wonderful, great, fantastic. So I can do this. Now everyone should have been brought to my screen. Fantastic, super, good. So I'm going to put you into breakout groups. We're going to give you about 15 minutes to discuss. And I'd like you to have a read of the article that I put up here. Now, you don't have to read the whole thing, and there's a link right here. But I'd like you to go down to the section that's called Reflections of a Cluster CEO, right here. So it's roughly a page to read. And this is a short piece written by Tanya, who you see on the back of the picture here, and she has been rated as one of the most successful cluster managers in the Norwegian program. But what's really interesting is to follow her thinking in terms of how she sees the role of a cluster CEO, how she sees the challenges, how she sees strengths and weaknesses. And she's been willing to share that quite extensively in this LinkedIn article that you see here. I'm going to put the link into your chat in just a second. So everyone should be able to access this here. There you go. So what I'd like you guys to do is take a look at the article and just scroll down to the part that says Reflections of a Cluster CEO. Discuss 3 questions. Question number 1, what are your key takeaways, your key observation in that sort of 1 page that Tanya has written? And then second, which is a more important question, in your experience, what makes a good cluster/network CEO? And I'd love to have you guys put in some good points here. And then using this cluster leadership map with the 8 levels that we discussed, how have you seen these in practice? So again, you can say that, I've seen visionary leaders, I've seen very strategic leaders, or vice versa. So what I'd like to have here is you guys working in groups, and feel free to use the pink sticky notes that we have on the side to add your comments. And this will be the first of 3 working sessions or breakout sessions where you will get a chance to work with your fellow participants. And I really encourage you to think about, okay, what are the key takeaways? What makes a good cluster/network CEO? And using the map below, what have we seen? So we'll give you 15 minutes for that in groups. So I'm going to put everyone into a group in just a second. We're going to be working with 5 groups in total. So we'll have 3 to 4 people per group. Super. So we have group 1, that's Johanna. Group 2, that's Jukka and Heikki. Group 3, Anna and Kari. Group 4, Petri and Trinu. And group 5 with Nina, Oliver, and Marika. So I'll give you time to get settled, and we'll have 15 minutes in total. Go ahead. Back on.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, I can say from our group just briefly with group.
All right. Laurie, who's in there? Good.
Yeah. So with the group 5, we discussed well, questions 1 and 2 were mainly focused on. Then we ran out of time quite, but well, the main message, both from perhaps our experience and from the article, was that it builds on trust, and because through the trust you get trust and personal relationship building, because through that you get to understand the cluster members' needs, and by understanding those and building the trust between you basically are able to get the collaboration and cooperation going on, because there can of course be this kind of tensions between, you know, well, the stereotype would be that why would a business want to cooperate with a potential competitor, for instance. So getting people to understand this, and there's a trust and a leadership. And then the low-hanging fruit was something that was pointed out, that Oliver in our group had a personal experience also that about those quick success stories and communicating those out in order to get the snowball rolling. Yeah, those kind of things.
And Larry, if you're going to say, you know, one thing that maybe stood different from leading a regular business organization, what would that be? Just really quickly.
I think it would be the versatility of needs that you have, the cluster members, and getting everyone like feel that they are involved and they are being heard in the, and that their needs are accounted for.
Yeah, no, good. Super, great. Listen, we're going to transition to the next step, which is looking at the management team and also, more importantly, the board. I'm going to share my screen here for a few minutes, and we're going to show you a couple of different examples. So just to check, Larry, you can see my seafood innovation cluster. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Perfect, good. So I want to show you guys 3 examples. And again, for those of you that are working for a cluster or you've previously worked in a cluster, you'll probably recognize this quite quickly. So first I want to show the management team. So this is the Norwegian Seafood Innovation Cluster. They have a managing director or CEO. Her name is Nina. She came from a banking background. But then she has a communication manager, innovation manager, which also doubles as a project manager. They have another project manager. Then they have office and admin, communication, have a relatively new advisor consultant. They have a project developer. They have a general manager for a big tech company that they've spun out. They have another project manager. They have an EU advisor, and she works extensively with funding and access to project financing. They have another project manager, and then finally they have a PR and a communication manager. So this is a relatively large team. They have a total 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So 13 people in that cluster. And that would be, by most standards, a relatively large management team. So that's 13 people working full-time for the cluster. Now, interestingly, if we change and we look at the board, this cluster has a board of only 6 people. So they have a chairman of the board, and he used to be an industry CEO for many, many, many years. Now he's a business angel and advisor. Then they have the CEOs of some of the biggest seafood companies. So this guy, Henning, is the CEO. Andreas is the CEO. And they represent the two of the 3 biggest seafood companies in the industry. Then they have a board member that comes from a big international corporate. They have a managing director / CEO of Cargill, and then they have a genetics. So this is a very small board for a cluster with only 6 people, and they all come from industry. Next, we're going to take a look at the GCE Ocean Technology. Again, different cluster. So they have the CEO, Ove, and he is probably recognized as the most vocal, most outspoken, most active / hyperactive cluster CEO, at least in the Norwegian system. And he's held that position for about 8 years. CFO, or Chief Financial Officer, Business Development Managers, you'll see there's a little bit different titles. Innovation Manager or Project Manager, R&D Manager, so Research and Development Project Portfolio, Event and Office Manager, Senior Research and Development, so that's more of a technical position, and a Communication Manager. So this you see here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So it's a little bit smaller team, and they have pretty much the same resources. So they could have had a bigger team if they wanted to, but here we have an example with a little bit smaller team. And then if we look at their board, you'll see here that they have both full members and deputy members. So industry, municipality, industry, research, industry, lawyer, so industry, and industry. So it's largely industry leadership on the board. And you can also see they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 12 board members altogether. So again, these are 2 clusters. They are in the same sort of cluster program. They have different management organizations and they have different board compositions. And then I'm going to show you one more example. This is from the Canadian program. So in Canada, they have very different structures. So for Canada, they have a board chair. Her name is Nadine. She works for Microsoft Canada. And then they have a total of 26 people on the board of the clusters in Canada. So all of these people are board members or observers in the Canadian Digital Supercluster program. You'll find a similar pattern with the Ocean cluster in Canada, where they have very large boards. And there are absolutely pros and cons. So the first example, they had 6 board members. The second example had 12 board members. And then these guys have, I believe, 26. Most of them coming from industry and most of them coming from sort of the region of Canada. So when we look at the management team, and when we look at the board structure, you'll find very different examples. Last, I'm just going to show you here for the Canadian. So they have 26 people on the board, and they have a leadership team. So the core leadership team is 3 people: so Sue, Karen, and Sean. But then they have a pretty large team of people working full time. So if we include the advisors that are working part time, they have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. So they have 24 people working full time. So again, different clusters will have different compositions, both at the board level and also at the management level. Now, let me take you back to our Maro board, and I'll show you sort of what that means in practice. I'm going to take a few minutes here to introduce the next exercise, which is around the board of directors. And I think in all the work that we have done with clusters around the world, the board of directors is really, really important piece, but it's very often forgotten or underrepresented. So what we have found is that there are three, let's call it performance level. So if you have performance level 1, you have a board that shows up and they do the work, but they're not really performing. It's very much a place where people will be joining and they show up and they sit at the board, but they don't really understand what they should be doing, or definitely not high performing. The next category that we have here that we call performing is very clearly a different board. I'll explain the details in just a second. But then a few places, a few times, I've seen what we like to call a high-performing board. And for a cluster, this is night and day. It's massive difference between a working board, which just shows up to do the work, a performing board that's doing quite well, and a high-performing board. So a successful cluster, in my view, almost always have a really, really strong and successful board behind it. So let me show you a couple of the pieces, the steps that we're looking for. So the first step is this mindset, like why are we here? So for the first one, some people will show up and say, why am I here? Well, I'm here because I represent my company. I'm here because I represent Vartisla, or I represent Fortum or Utility or any other company. And I'm only here because I want to serve my company. Or if you move all the way over here, you have someone who says, we are really here to build out the industry. We're here to build out the cluster. And our job, like, why am I here? Well, I'm here because we want to build out a world-class innovation cluster. So this first step, the mindset, they show up with a very, very different mindset. This is very company focused, and this is very cluster focused. Now, next we have what we call expectations. And here it's kind of, it's not always spoken, but people will say things like, the cluster really benefits from having me on the board, which is one set of expectations. While over here, people will say, this is a perfect match for the rest of my career. So by me putting in time, this will benefit me, and it will benefit also my career for the long term. Next, time, and this is a wonderful. So here people will say, I show up for board meetings, and that's all the time that I have. Over here, I spend 4 to 6 hours every week. That's a lot of time. I spend 4 to 6 hours every week working with the cluster. And the reason why this is possible is because people see a strong alignment between their day-to-day job and the work they do with the cluster. And then finally, over here, and I've seen this many places, people on the board will say, I spend between 20% and 50% of my time working with and for the cluster. Now, some of that work happens in my regular workplace, for example, in a tech startup, but it perfectly aligns with and supports the cluster. So it's not a question of, am I doing my company work or am I doing cluster work? Because they're so intertwined. But I have many cluster boards where I ask this question regarding time, and people just look at me and say, are you crazy? We show up for board meetings and that's it. Then I have to tell them, you're not going to, it's not enough. You need to be able to put in more time to get this thing really developed. Next, we have how people work with their networks. But But then we have an interesting one in terms of finance. So over here, people will say, my company, we pay our regular membership dues. And as long as we pay our fees, we've done our work. Here, people will often take the initiative and say, as a board member, we should actually pay a higher fee than the other members. And we should lead by example. And we should be able to get more money in than other participants are. So it's a very different mindset in terms of the financing. And then finally, this one is a big one. As a board member and key leader, it's expected that we pay higher membership fees. Like, of course we should do this, but also we are able to bring in significant project financing. We're able to bring in other partners, and I'm used to seeing board members that go out to visit companies. So board members, not the clusters of management, but board members go out and visit companies to ask for more project financing for the cluster. And again, very different kind of behaviors between different board members. One piece that's really important here is this key contribution. This is the last thing I'm going to show. So with the key contribution, some people will say, I offer my professional expertise and my professional insights into the cluster, and that should be enough. Here, people say, I actually develop really complicated projects with a large number of stakeholders, and I'm able to get these projects up to the cluster. And then finally, you have a board member that's able to go out and close strategic partnerships, close deals, and secure financing of different sorts. So you can see very different kind of roles that the cluster members at the board level will step into. I'd like you guys to go back into your groups and have a discussion. I mean, use this as a framework. I'm going to delete these bright colors. But for a cluster board or a network board or an ecosystem board, how do we develop this as a competence, and how do we develop this in Finland, and how can we do this better? So now we have 2 questions. We're going to give you about 15 minutes again, and I hope you'll have a good discussion around the quality of boards. After this, we're going to have a quick break, and then we're going to get into our main work for today. So I'll put you back in the same groups. I'll give you 15 minutes here for discussions around boards, for clusters, networks, and ecosystems. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okei, nyt täältä tällainen one observation from group 2. Actually, it seems that our comments are under group 1.
We call it real-time collaboration.
That's my mistake. I was in group 1 the first time, so I was popping suddenly in group 2 and just continued where I started.
It's okay, because our comments were not at all so good, so it doesn't matter.
I'm now going to call you guys the mega group, because it's true. Suddenly there was almost no people left in group number 1, so I merged group number 1 and 2 without telling you. Sorry, but good input. So maybe we can have 1 or 2 quick comments here from this mega group 1 and 2. What was some of your key input here?
Yeah, Cora here from VExpo. So we talked a lot about long-term strategies that, let's say, to get involved boards in a long run, you have to get companies. So maybe in Finland, you have to have strong, active, passionate boards, not that big. But then we also discussed about, yes, the long-term financing and also the clear communication of goals internally and externally, and importance of that. And then again, the same as earlier, experienced and skilled persons in the cluster so that it gains trust. Of course, the board members need to also be these kind of persons. So then more people come and join the cluster. That's some comments.
And without pointing any fingers, would you say that the boards we have today for the clusters and networks are really good, or do they have room to improve?
I'm quite sure in Finland we have a lot to improve.
No, Christian, I think that in Finland it is how we started a couple of weeks ago, so that we have only a couple of clusters run by development companies, and then most of the tens of the clusters, they are under a university or something like that, which means that they are programs, and then the board is actually the program board. It is totally different, and you cannot even say that, because their role is to control the program, not the cluster activity.
No,
sorry.
No,
go ahead.
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
No, I was going to add that this long-term strategy, it's also here because that we discuss that it's not the day one when we jump from the working, performing and high performing classes. So it takes a time and good plan how to get there.
Yeah. Well, guys, I'm glad you mentioned this, because obviously every cluster program and every cluster anywhere in the world still has a lot of room to improve. And the background for this work around the cluster boards really started with some of the work that I was doing with the Norwegian cluster program. And we've had a national cluster program for about 35 years. And now suddenly we realized, hey, we should do something with the board, because we've never done, like, no one has ever even looked at a board seriously. And just before COVID started, we developed what I think is the world's first cluster board chair development program. So it's not the CEO of the cluster, but it's the chair of the board. And we developed a specific development program for the chairs. And some of the work that I'm doing now in Canada and US, they're really, really interested in sort of training the board members and training the board chair, because they recognize, again, that it is a very different mindset and it's a very different skill set to be leading a cluster board as opposed to leading a more traditional business organization or regular company. So, if you guys say we have some work to do, don't worry. That goes for every part of the world in the world of clusters. This is great. After our coffee break, we're going to have you guys develop a new Finnish cluster. So in this new Finnish cluster, we can kind of shake off some of the baggage and some of the existing structures. And you're going to be working on how to build a board, how to build the management, and then how to build a project portfolio. Because very successful clusters understand that first you design the structure, and then you design the projects that the structure can deliver. And there's a strong linkage between those. But we'll cover that in depth after the break. So first we'll take 15 minutes, so 15 minutes. I'm going to put on the timer on the screen. When we come back, we're going to go into groups. I think we're going to be having 3 groups to be working, and we're going to spend a good portion of the time to really be working on cluster structure, leadership, of course, and also on the projects that come with it. But first, let's do a 15-minute break, and I'll pause the recording. And I have, Larry, I have a note that says recording, to make sure that I do not forget to put the recording back on. All right, everyone, take a 15-minute coffee break, and we'll see you very soon. Thank you. There we go. Larry, my recording note is right here and it's working.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding me. All right, so welcome back, everyone. And I'd like us to take the discussions and the early pointers from the first half with us, because first we talked about the cluster leadership role, which is largely around the CEO or the cluster manager, and we talked briefly about the board. Now I'm going to sort of add the organizational dimension with what I call the project dimension, and this is, in my view, one of the absolute keys to designing a successful cluster. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So we call this the structure plus projects. I'll give a quick introduction, and then we'll have you guys working on this together in your groups. So the instructions is for you to select a cluster or cluster topics. You can choose, for example, gaming or 5G or autonomous ships, autonomous cars, micromobility, batteries and storage, any topic that you'd like. And it can be an existing cluster, or it can be a potential future cluster. That's up to you to decide. Next, design the organizational structure. And to keep it, sensible, we've said up to 12 people. And then, and this is really the key, populate the innovation groups. And the innovation groups is really what combines the organizational design and the ability to get stuff done. Then we're going to select project categories. I'm going to show you this on the map. And then we're going to develop detailed project outlines. The last step is complicated. It's advanced. So we'll be flexible in terms of how far you get, but I think that at least most of you should be able to get through this quite quickly. So when you start, the first step is, well, the cluster we want to develop here is, I'm just going to say 5G cluster, for example, or you can say a gaming cluster, for example, or you can say a energy cluster, etc. That's up to you. Next, you're going to build your cluster. What we have here is what we call an organizational chart for the cluster. And I think most of you would recognize this very quickly. So you have the board. We talked about that previously. We have an advisory board. And advisory boards tend to be either very technical or they tend to be international. So a technical advisory board would be largely around the research and development, while an international advisory board would be around international partnerships, international alliances, and markets. Then we have a CEO forum, and CEO forum is where all the cluster member CEOs meet. So it's typically somewhere between 60 and 200 people, a meeting typically once per year. But it's a nice arena to get all the CEOs together. Then we have the cluster CEO. And notice here how we split the org. So we have the cluster CEO, and then we have the team members. And team members are the management members or the staff, and they are usually full-time, but they can also be part-time. But then we have the innovation groups, and the innovation groups is working groups or project groups or innovation working groups, same. But they are where a lot of the work gets done within a cluster. So if we look at the team, we have listed the most common roles. So for example, a research and development manager, we saw that with the GC Ocean example. CFO, we saw that with the Ocean example. A partnership manager or a membership manager. Talent training, that's something that's very important to the US clusters because they have a lot of workforce shortages. So they need to work on more talent, more education, and more training for the industry. Innovation manager, this is something that most clusters in Norway would have. Then we have an entrepreneurship and scale-up manager. So this is not very common. That is someone who is responsible for the early stage companies. Maybe they run a few incubation programs, maybe they run some accelerator programs. Then we have a role that is not very common around investor capital and investor relations. So that is all about bringing private investors, business angels, and VC funds and family offices into the cluster. Then we have an event manager. And again, you saw a few examples of those previously today. We have a communication manager, and then we have a business development manager. Now, if you ask me, I would say that this right here is the most important employee. So you have the cluster CEO, and then you have the cluster business development manager. So as an example, you'll find these people here. So you can just drag and drop and say, okay, we're gonna have 4 board members. That's very simple. And we're gonna have a CEO. That's pretty simple. And then the question is, well, what do we do next? So just as a quick example, I'm gonna say a capital strategy and entrepreneurship and maybe an event manager. So we can now drag these. You can see this is drag and drop really quickly. We have the event manager, the entrepreneurship manager, and the capital strategy. So now we have really quickly placed 4, 5, 6, we have 8 people in this organizational chart. And of course, you guys will discuss and decide what is best for you. But then we have the innovation groups. And the innovation groups would normally reflect the org chart. So based on this org chart, you would probably have one innovation group for startups and scale-ups. And here, the head would be the entrepreneurship manager. And the key members would be startup founders plus supporters. So you now have an org chart where this person is now running this group, and he is responsible for this work domain. Equally for the next one. So you could say that we have an innovation group for investor capital. And of course, you guys can replace this. This is just some quick examples where the head and the group manager, if you want to use that phrase, the head is head of capital strategy. This. Key members would be business angels, accelerators, family offices, and corporate venture funds. So here you would have a different group with different members, and it would now be this gentleman who would be running this and this. So this is how you tie together the organizational structure with projects. And then we're going to show you the next steps. So here we have a project for portfolio for clusters. And I think this is a really cool mapping. So now we can select 3 projects. I'm just going to do, like, for example, project A and project B and project C as 3 examples. So if we look at the first one, the entrepreneurship, startup and scale-ups. One question that you would be asking here is, okay, well, how do we get more startups in our industry? That's a very common question within the cluster. And you would say, okay, what is this? Is this more tech and research focused, or is it more market focused? And it's absolutely market focused. And then the question is this something that only the business developer or the CEO should be working on? Or is it something that a large number of partners? So here you can see it says 30 partners working on collaboration. So this would fit in what we call the joint value development. So in this case, we would now have a project for startups and scale-ups. And then this project would be, let's see, it would be sitting here and it would be owned by this guy. And then finally, and this is also one of those sort of successful keys, you always want to make sure that one board member is involved in each project. Like this. So you now start to get a organizational design. It's getting complicated, but it's all about tying the different people into the different projects that happen later on. So this is my messy example. Now, in your case, you can look at projects in the following way. In this category, you have projects that are largely technology or research focused, and they are largely driven by the cluster management. So the cluster management has to do a lot of work. Here we have clusters that are more market focused, but they're also driven by the cluster management. So it's the people working for the cluster, they have to do most of the work. Up here we have market focused, but very collaborative. So it means that there's a lot of members and partners in the cluster that's actually doing the work. And the role of the staff, the people working there, is much more about sitting back and running things in the background. And then finally, this is a lot of technology and research where the people in the cluster will do a lot of the work. So if we look at this example very briefly, in Canada, so the Canadian cluster program, they started here. So a lot of the work that happened in Canada was like early technology development, and very technology focused. But then gradually over time, they realized if we're going to be successful, we need to move from internal to much more member focused project development. So now they were running much larger projects with a lot of different stakeholders and members. And then I have been sort of helping them move this way and say that you need to have more market focused projects where it's about business development and it's not just about technology and research. So this has been the evolution of most of the Canadian clusters with regards to their projects. So far, so good. Now, the last step for you guys, if your time allows for it, is to go into a detailed project development. Now, this is complicated. So we have what we call a cluster project canvas, where you dive into one single project. For example, how do we get access to new markets? How do we develop more advanced 5G, 6G, 7G technologies? How do we build more startups within our industry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? But this picture right here, this is where the Danish clusters are world champions. Like the Danish clusters are amazing at developing projects and then finding funding for projects and delivering projects within the clusters. So understanding how the leadership and the structure ties in with the projects, that is a key to your cluster success. All right, that's a lot of information. I'm going to clean this up. We're going to give you guys 50 minutes, so 50 minutes to be working through this. And I think you'll have a lot of fun for the first half, and then it's going to get more complicated towards the second half. I would like to put you into 3 groups, so you'll have more people working together, and we'll see how well you guys handle this last part. So we are going to do, all right, so we have 1. All right, 3 groups. Good luck, and we'll see you in 50 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. So we're seeing the last group coming back now in just 20 seconds. Hello and welcome back. So you have been working now pretty much for an hour. Larry, how was your discussions?
Well, Chris, it was intense, interesting, fun, but it was, as you said, it became more and more challenging. And yeah, but it was a lot of fun, and always good to challenge yourself to think in these kind of it's often about trying to think in new ways and trying to really be innovative. It takes a lot of energy, but it's fun.
Well, that's a good combination. Oh, we can almost call that a workout for the day almost. But I mean, obviously I was watching and I was listening into parts of your work, and you know, this connection right here is actually one of the secrets to a successful cluster, because some clusters, they hire people and they get the members, but they're never able to organize any projects of any significance. So after a couple of years, they kind of just fizzle out because they don't have enough momentum and they don't get things done. While some of the clusters we worked with, you know, they have been able to deliver this crazy amount of projects because the way that they sort of structured the cluster organization, and that's really the keys. I think. I mean, I love how you guys connected the arrows and how, you know, all of these are interconnected. But you had one project, I think, one or two projects. Do you want to explain those briefly?
Yeah, with regard to the projects, we had we identified 3 projects, and then there was one project that we had time to look more closer at, and we chose the 3 projects were, as you see, energy storage, future fuels, and smart energy consumption project. We focused on the energy storage, and this is how far we came. Basically, the problem was to enable efficient and cost-effective energy storage with minimum of 24-hour capacity. I think here I think it was important that we are discussing some kind of an industry level issue, or even it's not a one company issue, but it's a systemic issue more or less. And then we had the scope and solution to make it more realistic. We thought that there would be like two main areas within it. First of all, the household level, and where you can have different types of solutions, and then on a municipality level, where there would be this kind of one pilot plant where we could test solutions. And the idea was to have this kind of pilot case ideation, kind of where these can come with ideas, and they are funded and through this project. Of course, we have not thought it through yet. But
no, and Larry, of course, this could take, you know, many weeks and maybe even many months in real life. So we want to provide you with some examples and frameworks, and then of course you need to continue working. But one of the reasons why I wanted to show you guys this today is tomorrow we're going to work a little bit more on the Danish cluster program, and we're going to look at the national structure. But one thing that Danish clusters are really good at is this project development, project financing, and project delivery. So they have like this crazy amount of really high impact, really important, big projects that they're able to do. So in a lot of countries, the clusters are kind of just network organizations, but countries like Canada and Norway and Denmark and others have been able to really develop them into highly valuable project organizations and project development organizations, and that means they have a completely different impact over time. So I think all the groups and all the participants today did a great job of trying to sort of tie together the organizational structure and an example of a project portfolio like this. This is not easy. You know, you do this in real life, it can be many months to get all the pieces in place and get the board members in place and get the innovation groups in place, and then get the projects in place. So this is difficult, but it's also really important. All right, we have 1 minute left, and I want to point you to tomorrow. So this is recommended. It is not required. You don't have to feel bad if you don't have time for it. But I put up 3 recommended pre-reads for tomorrow. 2 of these have been sitting here since we started several weeks ago. So one is the Danish cluster policy. It's a document from 2016 to 2018. So it's a little bit outdated, but it's a very, very good piece of work. So from a policy point of view, it's great work by the Danes. Then it's also the new website for the new, what they call the Danish strongholds and clusters for the future. So that's where the cluster program is today. This is from the ministry. And then finally, this is kind of a quick and light read. It's an article by something called Tech Barbecue, where they are looking at these 14 clusters that Denmark have today. So we're going to work on these tomorrow. We're going to read them together tomorrow, and we're going to jump into them. But if you do have time, I would encourage you to spend maybe half an hour, 20 minutes to read over these 3 documents. One of them is a policy document, 30 pages. One of them is a short website, and the other is a super short blog post. So they're not long, but they'll be very, very relevant for tomorrow. And then tomorrow, you can also see what we're going to be doing in terms of the content. And then we're going to have a really interesting day tomorrow to work more on the policy guide for everyone. All right. For everyone, last thing, Laura, you want to mention the questionnaire before we wrap up?
Yep. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so I posted in the chat a link to a 1 question quick questionnaire. Please go and fill it in. It's only 1 question, but it's important. And then after tomorrow's session, as I said previously, we will send the questionnaire with a few more questions. And please answer also that, because it's really important for that we are able to keep doing, that NordicHub is able to keep doing what we do, and also to then develop our activities. So please, really important for us that you fill it in, and it doesn't take more than a minute. But yeah, thanks, Chris.
Everyone, thank you very much for joining. Have a wonderful evening. Have a great afternoon, and I'll see you again, same time and pretty much same place tomorrow. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thanks, folks. Bye-bye.